next Mazza's Musings podcast live stream. We've got a lot to get through today. We are talking all about the New England Patriots and Gerard Mayo and what has really turned into a whirlwind situation over the past few days. I mean, I think information's been hitting us faster than Gerard Mayo got hit with his walking papers. So, first off, I want to thank Greg Cameron for joining me today. Thanks very much for coming on again, Greg.
Of course, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing good. And now I think that the last time that we talked some football was really the when we did our mock drafts. Leading leading up to that, we did talk a little bit of football. A couple of other times, but the last true uh, football discussion that we had was surrounding the draft. I think
Yeah.
a
Oh,
lot,
yeah. It's been a while. Not to
a
quote
lot.
Stained or anything, but it's been a while.
Well, and a lot has happened since then. Obviously, Gerard Mayo got fired by Robert Kraft just 1 year after being hired. He didn't even make it 365 days. Um, and just showing what a as cold as it is here in New England right now, it's showing just how much colder the world of professional football can be.
Oh, it was a completely frosty reception, certainly, that Mayo got at the game. You were there. I definitely
Yeah.
would love to hear sort of some of your observations there. But let me tell you, it really just showed just how much of a just cold world, the world of NFL football, and certainly being able to kind of stay on top as an NFL coach or even hold on to a job for a year truly is.
Yeah, and just to talk a little bit about the game, we were at the game on Sunday. It was weird. It was certainly a weird feeling. It had a lot of preseason kind of vibes to it, but at the same time, even in the preseason, when something good happens, everybody gets a little bit excited. If you're seeing your third string, sixth round rookie throwing dimes, you're a little bit more excited about it. It seemed like people were just like, should I be happy about that? They just scored. Should I be happy about this or not? And it was very strange. I think that that's the best way that I can put it. It was just, it all felt very, very odd.
I think kind of a perfect coda to a weird football year for the Patriots too, because I think even in some of the losses, there were some losses that they had this year where they looked pretty good,
Yeah.
despite coming out on the losing end. But it was just such a weird roster, a weird team, and I think a weird win against a Buffalo Bills team that certainly didn't look like they were trying to win anything on Sunday. That's for sure.
Well,
I'm not saying that Mike White is a human white flag here, but
yeah, I mean, I think that they were basically doing the same thing the Patriots were. I mean, the way that McDermott was calling timeouts towards the end of the game and everything showed that, like, he was still, trying to win the game from a strategic standpoint, at least. But, certainly the personnel didn't reflect that they were trying to win the game, which also kind of like fed in, it kind of threw in the face, everything that people were saying about, oh well, Mayo's trying to win this game to ruin a draft pick or something like that. I mean, everybody on the field was trying to win the game.
oh
uh
yeah.
there were all these weird theories about, oh, he knew he was going to get fired, so he was trying to win the game to screw him out of a draft pick and all this silliness. And really, it was just like he did everything he could to lose. He put a third string, sixth round rookie who hadn't gotten backup reps until this week, uh, in for all but one series of the game. Like, and he was throwing passes to, what was it, Terrell Jennings? Is that his name? The practice squad running back who they called up for that game, who almost
I
caught a
believe so,
terrific
yeah.
touchdown. But anyway, um, yeah, just so it was weird. I think that that's the the biggest thing that I can say about it was it just had a weird feeling. Like we had a lot of fun at the game. Milton threw some dimes. He showed the athleticism. Honestly, it felt like a lot of what we maybe saw in preseason and what people said they saw in camp just coming back to life in a meaningless regular season game. But there was a severe lack of energy, and I think that that's one of the things that definitely fed into this. The stadium was half full, and half of those, maybe more than half of those, were Buffalo fans. Even driving into the game from Western Massachusetts, we stopped at the Charlton rest stop, and it was just all Bills fans. So on top of
Interesting.
everything else, it just shows how available these tickets were. So um, and I don't think that that's anything that Kraft has much time for. Robert certainly has an affinity for Gerard Mayo. I don't know if Jonathan shared that affinity, but it just all kind of just didn't feel like you would think a Patriots game should feel like.
Yeah, and I granted, so I was out of the house. We were on our way back from Newport, and so I was just sort of kind of observing the game from afar via Twitter and Blue Sky and getting score updates to my phone. But like the weirdest thing was we were on our way back. We had stopped at even at the IKEA in Stoughton, and there were certainly a lot more dudes there than I thought that there would be, and it was sort of one of those weird things where like it's like, all right, so this is the final Patriots game of the year. I'm here. There are other people who probably also watch this team week in, week out, also here. Okay, this has been a very weird year. And I think, or certainly not one that was overall fun to experience.
No, that's for sure.
But I think what was so interesting was sort of being just like sort of just this mindset of like, all right, this game is happening. I'm not necessarily focusing in on it like I probably would have had it been the first game of the year. But I
Sure.
think but I think seeing sort of there was like, I don't know if it's necessarily like malaise or like football ennui, but it was just sort of just this weird of just like, all right, this is odd, this is weird, all
Yeah.
right, it's just this weird like nether space of enthusiasm.
No, yeah, I'd say that that's really it's an accurate reflection when people are choosing other things over watching the Patriots on Sunday. That in and of itself is something that when you're seeing it more regularly is an alarm. Should throw up alarms for any franchise, but especially one over the past 20 years with the success that they've had, the New England Patriots. Even post Brady, there was whether it was your morbid curiosity over over Cam Newton during the COVID year, or then they've got Mac Jones, and you're wondering what's going to happen. Then it becomes the train wreck of Mac Jones, and that was like a car accident that you couldn't look away
Yeah.
from. Yeah, so there was at least something that got people watching. This
Oh yeah.
felt like it just tumbled into apathy. So, which I think is, worse, because then, it was like you're not even talking about it anymore. It's not even on your radar anymore. Uh, IKEA's more on your radar.
Let me tell you, man, when you have to, when really you have to navigate through a store to just grab sort of most of the things, it becomes a true distraction. And honestly, after sort of seeing a lot of the vitriol online before, during, and after that game, I'm kind of glad I skipped it a little bit.
It was, after the game, you had people actively booing, um, the players on the field. And I understand this is how you're letting people know, you're letting ownership know your disapproval. But at the same time, you're getting upset at guys who are a lot of these guys are fighting for their livelihoods. They're not guaranteed a job next year. So, it's one of those things that is just like you're pointing this in the wrong direction right now, and you saw the way that some of these guys, like, I can't remember his first name, but Battle, he's a practice squad guy, for most
Oh
of the
yeah.
year. He played a hell of a game. Like, PFF gave him like a 95 grade. Now, granted, he was going up against other, third stringers in practice squad, but he played a hell of a game. He put some tape out there that is going to, help him possibly get a job. So it's hard to get upset with. It's hard for me to get upset with somebody who's putting in effort. They're getting paid to play a game. They're putting the effort into that game. I appreciate that. So we've already spent more time kind of on a little bit of a tangent than I had initially planned, but that's okay. That's what we're here for. um,
And we
but
actually did do an outline for this one. So like
we did.
I tried to tell Annie, my wife, that I was like, Maz and I made an outline. Like we are organized tonight.
We're trying to
We are Johnny on the spot. We're gonna do this.
we're trying to keep it
We
on the
didn't even
tracks
start
today.
it.
No, no. So, all right. So we'll get into it. And I think the biggest thing for me, first of all, is before we have this conversation about um, what led to Mayo's dismissal, I feel like sometimes when this discussion is happening, it's lacking some of the proper context. Um, and I'm not going to go through the whole history of it. I had posted something on social media kind of about everything, but basically, if you look back even just a few years, people considered Mayo to be this huge dunce now and everything like that. This guy was a coveted assistant. He was
He was a
being
rising
interviewed.
star.
Yeah, he was being interviewed for head coaching jobs. Now, granted, one of those jobs was the Broncos, which I think they then uh, went with Nathaniel Hackett, if I'm
Yes.
remembering that correctly. So that may not have been the best process generally, but
And the other
but
one that he interviewed with was the Carolina Panthers when they ended
right,
up with Frank Reich, who was a one and done too.
yeah. So, but he's one of these guys who at the time was considered one of those bright young assistants that kind of everybody's looking for that next new young thing. And so part of the reason why, one of the big problems that people have had is, oh, there wasn't an interview process, he just decided that he was going to give it to him. Kraft didn't just, decide to do this. This was a reaction to trying to keep a young, promising coach in his building. Now, and you could even say that perhaps the young, promising coach who had spent some time out in the business world out businessed Robert Kraft by getting him to put this language in his contract. But to keep, and Robert Kraft has owned up to this in the statement that he made when Mayo was fired, and a little bit in the press conference. Yeah, he put this language, this succession plan, in his contract so that he could keep him in the building. And I think the plan was okay. And I think it may have been Graff's story, Chad Graff's story. He touched on this a little bit. I might be getting my stories mixed up because there's been a lot flying around. But
Sure have.
but basically, it was this. Um, we'll have Bill chase the record. So then, presumably by 2025, that they both got extensions. So by 2025, we'll be able to roll this out. And in the meantime, Belichick will have taken Mayo under his wing. They'll, you know, they'll set up the succession plan to go, and then Belichick will sail off into the sunset on his boat, and Mayo will take over, prepared to take over the team. But then the Belichick era ended so horrifically and quicker than they thought. So the whole thing got escalated and accelerated, and he just wasn't prepared yet. And I think that Robert Kraft has said as much, that basically they were in a position where they were contractually obligated to give him this job at that point. I'm sure there may have been some buyout language or something in there, but they already probably had to buy out Bill Belichick's
Bill
contract,
Belichick, yeah.
which is reportedly his contract is $20 million a year. So that's a lot to eat just to negotiate with somebody else to be your head coach.
And I think
Thoughts?
the thing is, so there's a lot there, and you brought up the Chad Graff piece from The Athletic this morning, and I think one of the things that you didn't touch on in terms of the kind of transition of it all is Belichick. There was an anecdote, I believe, in there that towards the end of last year, Belichick started to withdraw from his assistants and people
Right.
within the building. I wonder what kind of, whether it's a psychological effect or certainly a confidence effect, that had on Gerard Mayo. And I wonder, and like, I don't want this to sound being kind of overly sympathetic to Gerard Mayo. Despite the fact that Gerard Mayo is one of my favorite Patriots players of that era, I I don't want his tenure as coach, however disastrous it was, to cloud my judgment on both Gerard Mayo the person and Gerard Mayo the player.
Right.
But after reading that whole bit about Belichick basically withdrawing from contact from folks in the building as that year wore on and wore on within him, I wonder just what kind of an effect that had on Mayo, and certainly the ability to create kind of a bridge between the two.
No, yeah, that's certainly fair. And I mean, I also wonder, and I've heard various things, and I can't tell if it was speculation or if it's actually true, but that um, this was Kraft's succession plan. That this wasn't necessarily something that uh, Bill was completely on board with. Um, and I don't know the truth to that. That is, so you have to wonder how on board with this Bill was from jump, or if this was something that he was kind of made to accept because this is what his boss was telling him that should happen or will happen.
I think that's probably for sure the case. Granted, we can speculate on the palace intrigue as much as we want, but but I just sort of wonder if what, we've heard bits and pieces about how bad the 2023 season was, but I just sort of wonder what kind of an effect that had on Gerard Mayo. And I think it's very interesting. I went also looking back for like quotes and sort of color from the Gerard Mayo introductory press conference on last year on January 12th. Again, we didn't even make it 365 days. It's crazy. But if you recall, the enthusiasm certainly coming from Robert Kraft was unbounding. Like there was just boundless enthusiasm from Robert Kraft on the hire of Gerard Mayo. And I think certainly I got caught up in that, being just like, all right, this is great. He's been around the building. He's certainly a different personality than Bill, and but knows what it takes to do what Bill has done. And then at the same point, I remember people after that press conference being just like, well, he didn't really exactly give any vision stuff. And it was just sort of, it seemed like it was empty, not necessarily empty promises, but certainly there didn't seem to be any direction there.
Yeah.
And then kind of what followed the next couple of weeks, I think, were warning signs that we didn't know were warning signs, but we probably should have, looking back on the coordinator
Hmm.
search.
No, yeah,
You
I
know,
think that that's a great point.
I think interviewing 12 candidates for offensive coordinator, Alex Van Pelt was the 12th coordinator that they talked to.
Yeah.
And that, if you recall, the team hiring Alex Van Pelt, it certainly felt a little out of left field and a little bit like, It felt like a team going, well, crap, I don't know. Alex would seems like he'll say yes. Great, we'll take him.
Yeah, and I think that that more on top of everything else, it's felt like this was a an Elliot Wolf pick. You know, like this was just like, okay, Elliot, who do you got? Do you have any thoughts here? Because we're running out of options.
And it absolutely felt that way. I mean, it felt like a bunch of just guys trying to work through whatever Rolodexes they had.
Yeah,
And then it was like, oh, Alex is a good dude. I worked with him in Cleveland a little bit and in Green Bay a little bit. He's a good dude. Like it's like it's like teenage boys trying to figure out who to invite for a party. And then they get to sort of the dregs of the invite list and just go, well, he's chill. All right, cool. Let's just invite him. And that's just what we'll do. And I think that should have been a warning sign. And then it was such a weird process in the beginning that I think we just didn't take enough kind of enough of a look at that at the time. And I think even as like the start of the year sort of wore on to be like, okay, that was weird. Why didn't we talk about that more and how odd that was?
yeah. And on the other side, you know, the graph report also had the mention of Gerard Mayo offering uh,
Steve
Belichick's
Belichick?
son. Yeah, Steve Belichick. I got the Belichick sons mixed up, Brian and Steve, uh, offering him essentially a lesser role, basically to stay on, but you know it was going to be Covington. Now at the time, I think you and I both were not, you know, not opposed to Covington. I think that
No.
we kind of assumed that uh, that both the Belichick boys and maybe some other people were going to be out the door too. There were more holdovers on that side of the ball than I think even we might have expected, even with uh, Gerard being the new coach. Um, but that struck me as kind of odd. Um, I, I I don't know if it's necessarily something that is quite the red flag that some people have made it out to be, but it certainly was one of those odd kind of decisions to make. But it kind of feels to me like that is almost you either say you can keep your job or see you later. You know, this seemed like a half measure, like he was trying to you know, extend an olive branch, but instead it came off as something, you know, almost kind of insulting.
Well, and I think looking back too, if we look back at last year's coaching cycle, I think the fact that Belichick didn't get hired for a job and then Steve goes immediately to Seattle for the University of Washington. Like I was saying this to a work colleague of mine, we were talking about that story today. That do you blame Steve Belichick for doing that? I don't.
No.
I would go back to be a I would go back to college and do a college job after doing this job forever. Heck yeah, I would do that. And I think I almost wonder if Steve Belichick, as insulted as he was, also sort of saw the writing on the wall too.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, very much a possibility. So, but the main thing that I think that ultimately all of this is window dressing if the team performs, and they didn't, and so that was, you know, and Kraft talked about this as well. I want to first play just a little clip, and I want you to listen to. This is what Karen Guregian, when we had our conversation before the season
Sure.
started, um, this is what she had to say when we were talking about what we would consider a successful season for the Patriots, and she had just written a column on this, so this was pretty fresh in
I
her mind at
think
the
there's a
time.
couple of important historical notes for Mayo or whoever to point out. When Bill Parcells first arrived in an obvious rebuild, basically blowing things up and trying to once again, get the Patriots off the mat. His first year, they started 5-11, and they only won one game in their first 10, but they won their last 4 in a row. And that was a sign of how they had progressed and how things had started to click, and they had a really good feeling going into the next year. And guess what? They made the playoffs in year 2. Bill Belichick, when he first took over, his first year, 5-11. They won 3 of their last 6 games. And again, they started to look like, things were starting to get together. The following year, they win the Super Bowl. So, I mean, there are examples of how these things start, evolve, and eventually you get to the place where you want to get to. So, and again, it's hard to go through losing when you're a player, but if they can continue to see the light at the end of the tunnel, if they can see the progress or see how things are evolving and developing, I think, again, this is a year that's going to set the stage for beyond. Now, if they go 0-17, it's going to be a tough sell. But I do think they'll win games, and I do think they'll have a few surprising wins in there. But as I said, you want the momentum to build up to where they're really playing or starting to look a lot better toward the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think that's what it was towards the end of the year you weren't seeing that progress. And we were even that Bills game that they, almost kind of sort of pulled out. It almost felt like that was more of a reflection of how the Bills played than how the Patriots played. And so I think
No, keep
that
going.
I think this was the biggest thing, was just like you didn't see that light at the end of the tunnel. You didn't see that steady progression, and where you could kind of be like, okay, this is starting to come together. Had they won 4 games, I think that's the biggest thing, is people are just like, well, he was a first year coach with a terrible roster. What did you expect? It's not so much the record. It's, you wanted to see progress in the positive direction, and you just didn't. And then you had that debacle against the Chargers, who I still maintain are not all that good a football team. And I have a whole Harbaugh take on, but I'm not, that's for a different show. But I mean, basically there was no evidence that this was a process that was yielding positive results in any way, shape, or form outside of Drake May. That was one thing. There was a longer part of this clip from this previous thing that Karen mentioned that Drake May was the key. And if you had something in Drake May, he was going to be, the driving factor. He was going to create the energy for this team. And you saw that a lot. But the thing is, if he's the only thing that's creating the energy, that's still a major problem.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting. Like, I sort of think about kind of enthusiasm for the future, and I think that really ties into what Karen had said on your podcast previously. The big comp that so many people kept making for Gerard Mayo's like best case scenario. Who was it?
The coach of the Lions.
It's your favorite guy, Dan Campbell.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an unfair comp to Gerard Mayo anyway, because of just because Dan Campbell's he's a different cat. There are some people who that act wears thin on. I'm not talking about anybody in present company, certainly during the Dolphins tenure that he had. But it's interesting, what Dan Campbell's done in Detroit. I don't know that there are many people who could pull off something like that. And I think making that comparison early, and certainly I don't think Karen was making that that comparison kind of right off the bat, but I think just the idea of like, well, it's doable. This other guy who had kind of a weird introductory press conference and a former player who players really like, it's happened before. But I think just like the fact that they didn't get better. I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about it because it was in the Chad Graff piece. But if there's a game down the stretch that the Patriots did not win, I think there are two different reasons that really stick out for me. The first one, on a positive note, is that Tennessee loss. The end of that game was insane, and that was one of the first games where it's just like, all right, Drake May's got it. He's him. You don't have to call him Drake. You can call him Himothy because he is him. And I think the other one on the other side of the coin is that Cardinals loss. That Cardinals loss is one of the worst Patriots losses I've ever seen. I had said to you earlier that game was just sort of it was a nondescript snooze fest.
Yeah.
But also at the same point, coming out of the bye and looking as if, football was so foreign to them that week, and they were just sort of, there was just sort of a malaise to them. Like really, they seemed bored by it. Like they just seemed like a bored, lazy team. And I think that was one of those games where it was winnable. That Cardinals team stinks. And I think coming out of that bye week and not doing anything with that was so disheartening. I wonder if I look at this season differently if they win that game and they at least play it close with the Chargers. I wonder just how we think about this team. But when both of those games were just, a team rolling over to two opponents that were definitely beatable, I think goes a long way in sort of talking about just how bad this year was.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, now getting to the graph piece on that portion, there was the thing that they're talking about how Mayo left the coaches and such up in the front of the plane where they were watching film and went back to where the players were playing cards. Now people have again latched onto that. That's one of those little snippets that ended up making the rounds early this morning on social media, and it's notable that the coaching staff found this to be odd. I kind of read that as this was a guy who what actually was reading the room correctly, but then not responding the way that he should have, because I think that he saw the lack of interest that his team had in playing and winning that game. So he was trying to get, instead of having that separation, that wall between player and coach, he was trying to reestablish something with his team. So, I didn't take that to be, oh, well, Gerard, just went and started playing cards and he didn't care about, it was just because it was on top of everything else so jarring compared to the way that things are done usually. It stuck out to people. So I didn't have as much of an issue with that. I think that at that point, it was more just a sign that he was trying to regain control because he felt that the wheels were coming off. But I think it was more emblematic than it was, an actual like that action being a problem, if you know what I mean.
I read that, and the quote's interesting because the quote it says, "Can't say I've ever seen somebody do that," and I almost wonder, like, I think we read into quotes like that as if there was as if this person is like disgusted, but I almost wonder if this is somebody being just like, never seen a coach do that, and I wonder if Mayo's motivation for that was to just be like, all right, guys, we got to be better, but. Like, I almost wonder if he was trying to get them to, like, talk a little bit about it and try to like pal around a little bit to try and get them to talk about what had just transpired and not have it be like, oh, we're having fun, we're palling around playing cards. Who cares that we just lost to the Arizona Cardinals? A part of me just feels like it's more of him trying to like get something going out of that team, trying to be like, trying to be kind of collegial and just trying to get something out of them compared to just watching film and looking at how the same old Patriots had done the same old mistakes in Arizona.
Well, and I mean, I think that I want to make sure that we're not sounding too much like Mayo apologists here, because I don't think either one of us are necessarily shedding any tears for Gerard
Oh,
Mayo.
no.
But it's more like once that happens, once you feel you have to do that, it's probably too late. You know what? You're careening off the cliff already. So I mean, I guess I'm kind of just like, I can see what his thought process was here, but by that point it was just too late, you know.
Yeah, that is the moment where the water is rising. There are no lifeboats. Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio are in the cold North Sea, supposedly with enough room on a door. But like I wonder if that was just sort of a result, like just sort of one of those being just like, oh, he did another weird thing again. Like, I
Yeah.
wonder if somebody's got to have a list, and I'm sure we don't know the half of it, of like, well, that was weird. That's not how we do things here. But it's also like, this is a new culture, and he's trying to build something.
Well,
But
there's sorry to interrupt, but there's an interesting
you're fine.
point too. We don't know who that source was. So where else has that person been? If that person has only been in the Patriots system with Bill Belichick, who probably never set foot in the back of the plane,
Yeah, didn't even know the plane
then
had one.
the context matters, and some of it we don't have. So again, not trying to be an apologist here, but understanding that we're all trying to read between the lines of some of this, and obviously we can glean different things from it.
Yeah, and I think that too, of like, how many weeks did he say something on Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening and then have to walk it back the next day?
Stacey
How many
James
times?
Stacey James must have had like so many just like stress dreams and night terrors, after these press conferences. I swear to God, and I like, to me, it's one of those things, and I'm going to get into this whole thing later in more detail when we start talking about who's going to coach the team next, which we should get to soon. We're running long here, but
Yeah, we got to transition
all that quirky stuff doesn't matter if you're winning. Again, it's all window dressing. Nobody cares. People might think it's silly or it's stupid that he does this, but nobody's going to care if he's winning. Look at Joe Mazzulla. He says crazy stuff all the time. I'm not even
my favorite.
I mean, look, I hope the Celtics win. I'm a Boston sports fan, so I hope they win. I'm not a Celtics fan per se, but I know every time that he's said that he's been on a podium and said something crazy, but nobody cares because they're a contender.
They win.
Yeah.
You can say weird stuff when you win. Like, I think about like just weird coaches in general in sports. Like, they let you be weird if you win. All apologies to our buddy Mike Jarvis. I feel this way about a guy who certainly has a longer leash than I would have given, is Mike McDaniel. Mike McDaniel wins. Not by much, but wins. Wins enough that Stephen Ross doesn't say, all right, let's get the weirdo in the spectacles out of here. But like I wonder if there's like if there's like a graph of like a line of of weirdness on one axis and amount of wins on the other, where like there's a perfect sweet spot of weirdness to wins, that correlates being just like, yeah, your job's safe. You're totally fine.
I mean, I'm sure there is. I would imagine in that specific case, the fact that the team looked completely different with their quarterback versus without their quarterback says something. It probably says more about the quarterback. Who
Oh, for
a
sure.
lot of times we undervalue, I think. But at the same time, he's supposed to have one of those systems that's plug and play, and not the case. So, but that's a whole another. We're keeping it
Yes,
on the rails.
we are.
All right. So, the one other thing, and this is kind of attached to the conversation about what we're talking about with Karen and development and everything like that, was when talking with his first name's escaping me. Is it Mike McKenna? No, he was a goalie.
Harry McKenna.
Harry McKenna. Mike McKenna was
Harry
a
McKenna.
goalie for the Springfield Falcons, I think.
Yes, he was.
But anyway, Elliot Wolf talked with him, and one of the things when I heard it read on the radio and the complete quote wasn't read, it sounded much more like, shoving Mayo under the bus. When I read the complete quote, it wasn't quite that, but you could tell there was some of that. But he talked about how they anticipated more internal development, which I think is a totally fair criticism.
Oh, completely.
I mean, and he directly talked about, receivers. He also kind of was just like, we thought that Polk was going to be more plug and play, and he wasn't. So, he kind of, walked it back and was just like, we need to do better. But it's just another reflection that I don't think that Robert Kraft was the only one in that building who was just like, well, we're not progressing the way we need to. And I think that Elliot Wolf was also in his ear, about that too, So just one more thing that I wanted to throw in there that I had heard and read recently. And when you read the whole thing, it's not quite as, like soundbitey as, sports talk radio makes it out to be, but it was something that will still raise an eyebrow. Because Elliot Wolf and his staff did not bathe themselves in glory this year either. The fact that he's getting another bite at the apple.
Do we actually think that though?
Well, we'll get into that.
We'll get there, but
the fact
yeah.
the fact that Robert Kraft said that he and Alonzo Highsmith are going to be involved in the process for hiring a new coach, I think speaks to them maintaining, if not their current roles, prominent roles in the front office.
But something.
So now we're into hiring, and I want your thoughts on this, because I was originally, when I saw, especially they had fulfilled the Rooney Rule by talking to a couple of minority coaches, in Byron Leftwich and who's the other one? Pep Hamilton.
Hamilton.
Who neither of which are in football right now. I was just like,
right.
Okay, this is not a serious discussion here. This is not an actual serious process. I see some irony here in the people who are criticizing the Crafts for just giving it to Mayo, anointing Mayo, and then saying, well, just sign Mike Vrabel. Just bring in Mike Vrabel. I don't want that. Now, I know you want to move quickly with this, but you can still do actual due diligence and bring in some people. And I wonder if because I think that the Crafts have their antenna up. I think that they're aware, and they've been aware all season of what's been going on. I wonder if now the request to talk to Aaron Glenn is kind of they're trying to deflect that and be like, no, we're bringing more people in. This isn't a sham.
I agree with that, but I also think, and I won't lie to you, I think Aaron Glenn is an awesome candidate. And I think they've heard everything. They've got rabbit ears over there at one Patriot place, and I think they're definitely hearing what so many Patriots fans are saying. They're hearing from the nothing but Vrabel folks, from the you should do a larger search and find the right guy. I think they're hearing from the we need an offensive mind as the head coach, so then that Drake May's growth doesn't get stunted. I think they're hearing all of that, but I think it's interesting. I thought it was very interesting that they announced that they're going to interview Aaron Glenn for this job today, and that they're going to try and get it done before that bye week is over. And I just wonder if either they get a sense from Vrabel that Vrabel won't necessarily automatically sign. Like people certainly seem to think on Twitter and Blue Sky that he will, or that they're skittish about Ben Johnson, who I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. And I think Aaron Glenn is just one of those guys who's been around football, been around the NFL for 25 years, was a darn good player for the Jets and for the Saints. And I just wonder if they're trying to figure out more about this search. This is a weird coaching cycle. And I think if they're going to be weird about it, I hope that they're just weird enough that they do their due diligence, as opposed to just interviewing people to interview them, to fill up their Google calendars,
Yeah, no, I mean, I like Aaron Glenn as a candidate. My question is why did you wait to put in the request to now? That to me feels reactionary. And whether now it could, as you mentioned, it could be reactionary, with the fans, or I mean, a lot of the national media is just like, come on, let's cut the crap with this. This isn't real. With
Yeah.
with Byron Leftwich and such. But yeah, it could also be that there's been some back channeling. They're like, yeah, I'm not sure about Vrabel, if this is a slam dunk that people think it is. We could just be, one thing that the Patriots have been used a lot is as leverage. So is Ben Johnson just taking this to leverage other job opportunities? So yeah,
The Bears specifically.
yeah, I mean, I think that there's the skeptical part of me is just like, that they're hearing a lot of, this is a sham, blah, blah, blah. And especially after all the criticism they took with the Mayo appointment, so to speak, that they're really PR conscious at this point. So they're trying to make it seem less obvious that they're, I don't have any problem with them moving quickly, but
I don't either.
I want to process. I want them to go in wanting to learn something. And I'm not sure when you bring in Byron Leftwich and, Pep Hamilton, that you're doing that, I, and if you want to get
they'd be really fun offensive coordinator candidates. I think I love Pep Hamilton. I'm a big Pep Hamilton guy as a coordinator. I don't necessarily know that 5 games during the COVID year in the, was it XFL, that if that's enough. I don't. His offenses at Stanford were great. Some of his Colts offenses were pretty good. And he's a really good coach for young quarterbacks. If he was in here to interview for the offensive coordinator position, I'd be all about it.
And who knows, maybe they're feeling that out too with some of this. But we've already kind of talked about it a little bit. But the leader in the clubhouse, the betting favorite, however you want to put it, is Mike Vrabel for this job. Um, as I pointed out, I think before we were on the before we were live, just so people don't get any sense that I have any bias or prejudice against Mike Vrabel, I am wearing my Mike Vrabel shirt right now. But Mike Giardi said earlier he talked to 6 executives, NFL executives, and when he asked them what they thought the Patriots process was, they all said Vrabel. So this is a perception around the league that Mike Vrabel is going to be the next coach of the New England Patriots.
And I don't necessarily think that that's the wrong hire. I don't. They need a culture, and they don't have one. I don't know what kind of culture a Ben Johnson would bring. I think Aaron Glenn would be a culture guy. If you watch that Detroit Lions Hard Knocks, if you have not, you for sure should. Anybody on this stream listening to this absolutely should. It's if you just want to see enthusiasm and certainly what seems like the least toxic locker room in the NFL, watch that Hard Knocks. It's great. And Aaron Glenn is one of the key cogs in that. He's awesome. I just feel like what they want is they want a tone setter. And I don't know that they necessarily feel that with a Ben Johnson type, where I feel like an Aaron Glenn or a Mike Vrabel type is kind of what they're looking for.
So I think that culture has its place in the locker room. You know what the biggest culture setter is? Winning. You know what we would be saying about our friend in Detroit or our friend in Miami if they didn't win football games?
Nothing.
They were clowns and
Yeah.
they'd be out of a job. So
Yeah.
I understand this whole idea of culture. And I get it. And there's a place for it, but I mean, look, what was Bill Belichick's, the Bill Belichick culture, the Patriots culture didn't really change when the winning stopped, just the winning stopped. So culture only takes you so far. And so, if now, and I'm not going to sell Vrabel short here. Vrabel has proven that he can coach in the league. He's won in the league. So I don't want to sell him short there. But
he took Ryan Tannehill to an AFC championship game. They should give presidential medals of honor for that.
If they end up hiring Mike Vrabel, I'm not saying that it's a bad hire. I'm saying that I have questions. And the biggest concern that I have is related to the offense, who he brings in as an offensive coordinator, what kind of personnel he's looking for. I just want to, bear with me for a minute here because I did some looking into this here. One of the things that I think is a staple of Mike Vrabel is he's a conservative. When it comes to offense, you need just enough offense so that your defense can win the game. And look, that works when you've got Derrick Henry.
There it is.
Okay, so
there it is.
So here's I'm just going to go through. Just here is where they ranked. First, I'll do rushing. This is where they ranked in rushing during his time. 2018, 9th in attempts, 6th in yards. 2019, 10th in attempts, 3rd in yards. 2020, 2nd in attempts, 2nd in yards. 2021, 1st in attempts, 5th in yards. And then things started to tail off. 2022, 11 in attempts, 13th in yards. 2023, 20th in attempts, 17th in yards. Now, 4 of those years, including like the 2 where he, the 11th and the 20th ranking, Derrick Henry led the league in rushing attempts. Okay? So even when they weren't, now what that tells me is they weren't running and they weren't running the offense efficiently, so they weren't getting as many opportunities to carry the ball. It wasn't that they were carrying the ball less. It's just Derrick Henry only carried it 200 and something times instead of 300 and something times.
Because he scored, didn't he have one of those years where he had like 4 or 5 like 50+ yard touchdowns too?
Yeah, and here's another thing. It's not just, he didn't just lean on the running game when he had Derrick Henry. 2021, Derrick Henry only played 8 games. That was the year that they were first in rushing attempts.
Wait, okay. Derrick Henry was hurt 8 games, and they finished first.
The team finished first in rushing attempts. So it's not just a Derrick Henry thing.
Who was the backup that year? Is that Tony Pollard? No, he's there now.
No, I don't remember. Was it?
Sorry, I don't mean to spin us off, but
I had it at one point, but it's not in front of me now.
I got you.
Passing attempts. Now, the first year was a Mariota year. The second year was the Mariota Tannehill flip. So there's context here. And the last year was the Tannehill Levis flip. So, right? 2023 was Levis's rookie year. Is that correct?
No.
No?
I think it's the Malik Willis flip.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, here we go.
Yeah.
2018.
It's not anywhere. It's not any better.
2018, 31st in attempts, 22nd in yards. 2019, 31st in attempts, 21st in yards. 2020, 30th in attempts, 23rd in yards. 2021, the year that Henry got hurt, 25th in attempts, 24th in yards. 2022, 30th in attempts, 30th in yards. 2023, 30th in attempts, 29th in yards. So the guy just actively avoids throwing the football. Now, I will say the one thing that they were good at, they were really good. Like they figured out that Ryan Tannehill was really good at play action. And when you have Derrick Henry running your play, for your play action, that opens up a whole lot of stuff for you. So I think that some of it is obviously the product of having Derrick Henry. But it's clear that was his philosophy. Now, and that's not all that different from what they said that Alex Van Pelt's philosophy is, or even, Stefanski to that. It's all about, setting up big plays in the passing game through the running game. So I in some ways it's not a total deviation from, what they were trying to do this year in New England. New England was trying to do it without an offensive line. But it's a question for me. The other thing is everybody talks about Mike Vrabel. Hey, defense is his side of the ball. Offense. Obviously, he had somebody running his offense. Defense is his side of the ball. How many times do you think they had a top 5 offense? Let's say top 10 defense in terms of points allowed.
I'm going to say it's either once or never. The one time was the year that they had the 1 seed.
Twice.
Okay.
First time was 2018, and the second time was 2021. They were, from year to year, In yards, 8th, 21st, 28th, 12th, 23rd, and 18th. And in points, 3rd, 12th, 24th, 6th, 14th, 16th. So we're not talking about a guy who has like coached these dominating defenses either. Like, it's not like we're bringing a guy who's going to bring back the Steel Curtain or, the 85 Bears. So what, I still look to what does he do well? And if it's culture, okay, that's fine. That culture will get you 9 wins for a few years. And, then you're in that mediocre place. Some of one
Jeff
of
Fisher land.
exactly, or honestly, Mike Tomlin. I mean, it's, and if you're looking to get back to some relevance, then that's fine. But I think that we're looking for more here, and I'm not saying that that's necessary. I think that Vrabel's the layup. Honestly, I think he's the layup. I think that he's the guy that, yes, he'll win you nine or 10 games, and get you in the playoffs, and we'll see what happens.
He has the least amount of risk.
And that's basically what he did with Tennessee. He got them to a couple playoffs. And then, by the way, who is running personnel matters too, because part of that precipitous fall that he had was, related to who he was tied to, in terms of personnel and who was making those personnel decisions.
The arranged marriage with he and Rand Carthen did not work, which is why I'm sort of worried about whoever comes here. And then the arranged marriage is with Elliot Wolf and Matt Groh. They've got to find somebody who can bond with them and not just have it be like coaching the crafts, and then Elliot's just off to the side being like, oh yeah, we totally talked about this. Sorry, we should have brought you in on this. Like, that's, I think, a big deal too. And that's why I hope they interview a ton of people so that then they can get on the same page.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't exactly say that things were great with with John Robinson.
I don't agree. I agree with that too. Like, I think
wasn't John Robinson the one who decided to trade off Brown and go
AJ Brown
Treylon
for pennies on the dollar? Oh yeah. Oh god.
Yeah, and then we'll just replace him with Treylon Burks,
who I don't think he's still on the Titans. I wouldn't know.
I couldn't tell you, and
I wouldn't know.
That's the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, again, I don't want to make it seem like I'm, like I think Vrabel's a terrible candidate, but I think that he's been looked at, as he's probably the best veteran coach who's available in the cycle. So fine, but like, let's not act like, we're getting, Andy Reid here or something like that.
Can I ask you this?
Sure.
So Vrabel was available last coaching cycle too, when the Patriots had their vacancy. Does Vrabel's candidacy look different this year compared to last year's? Granted, I know football doesn't happen in a vacuum, but I wonder if we're having this conversation a year ago, how we feel about the Vrabel tenure, or if just because we've let it kind of sit on the windowsill for a while, if it would look different.
So, well, it's hard because there was no Patriots. There was no Patriots vacancy. The vacancy never existed. So
you're right.
It's a little bit of a hard because it's not like the Patriots decided not to interview Vrabel last year. What they decided to do was not terminate or not violate the contract that they had signed with Mayo. So it's a little bit different. I think, if anything, what was it? 6 wins in his last year and 7 wins the year before that. People forget that a little bit more this year than they would have in the last cycle, you know. And um, I do think that he would have been someone that it would have made sense to bring in. But I don't think that there would have been the clamor, for him. Um, Something that I want to touch on though about, like, with the offense that I mentioned too, is Mike Vrabel wasn't just sitting on his couch, waiting for a job opportunity. He was, like, he went to the Senior Bowl, when he networked. He went, he went and did a consulting stint with the Browns. And as I was talking before, the Patriots were kind of trying to do some of the similar stuff, in terms of setting up the pass through the run, and they both ran kind of West Coast style offenses and everything like that. And he was working on the offensive side of the ball. So that to me is encouraging. It shows me a guy who's possibly looking at some growth, looking at areas that maybe he's recognized need to be stronger and need to adapt, as the game evolves. So I do want to give him that credit too, and I think that that's context that is needed when we're talking about him as a candidate here.
Right. And I wonder sort of how that's affected him and how that's affected his football philosophy too. I think that's a very interesting thing to kind of look at, especially with his candidacy in this cycle.
So, okay, we spent a lot of time on Vrabel. I feel like we have to at least touch on, a couple other candidates. Ben Johnson's the other big name that's being talked about. I think the thing with Ben Johnson is it requires more work. You're absolutely right. Like, Vrabel's going to come with a system, with everything in place, whereas you don't quite know what that is. I mean, he may have, and God, he better have more of a vision on what that is than Gerard Mayo did. But I'm sure that Johnson has his short list of players and everything like that. But he's never really had to deal very much with the personnel side of things and things like that. Though I don't know to what extent in Tennessee Vrabel was involved in those decisions. But it's different when you're a coordinator and somebody else is handling the liaising between between the coaching staff and the front office. So I think there's more pieces to fit into the puzzle if you go a Ben Johnson route. I don't think you can argue against his results as an offensive mind. I mean, he took Jared Goff, who was a throw-in in a trade, and turned him into, into a good quarterback. I mean, he looked broken in that Super Bowl that the Patriots that the Patriots took him to the woodshed. But I mean, Jared Goff has to be thanking his lucky stars that he ended up with Ben Johnson, because that was career saving for him in some respects. So I think if you're looking for somebody who's going to be good for Drake May, this is a really good bet. And then you need somebody on that other side to be kind of like that. That the comp that I hear all the time is the Wade Phillips to Sean McVay kind of thing.
You would need
I
an
think,
old head somewhere. You would need a Vic Fangio type.
and that's the kind of thing that Mayo was missing too, is everybody was new across the board. He didn't have that kind of thing and I know, as silly as it sounds, but some people have thrown out the name like Joe Philbin, who's um, who
Has
has
ties to Elliot Wolf, by the way.
Long Meadow's own Joe Philbin.
I forgot
So
about that.
there's a New England
Our buddy Joe
tie
McAuliffe
as
used to
well.
talk about that all the time.
That's right. Yes, when he wasn't talking about the Dolphins popping champagne every time that he could mention it.
Yes.
But anyway,
We love the senator. We love him.
but yeah, so I think that would, like I said, there's more pieces to put in place there. Doesn't mean that it's not something that you shouldn't seriously consider.
And it's interesting. I've got his career history pulled up. Ben Johnson's had a very interesting kind of career. Played at North Carolina, like Drake May. He's my age, so that's fun. That makes me feel, very accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, how do you think that makes me feel?
I'm not saying, but I'm not saying. But his career history, he had a year as a graduate assistant at Boston College. And then in 2011 was their tight ends coach, was an offensive assistant with the 2012 Dolphins. That's not the Philbin team, is it?
Yeah, I think it was.
Oh, we might be building a staff here just with this thought. 13 to 15, he was the assistant quarterbacks coach with the Dolphins. 2015 was their tight ends coach. So he overlaps with Campbell there. 16 and 17 was the assistant wide receivers coach with the Dolphins. 18 was the wide receivers coach. And then 19 moves over to the Detroit Lions, thanks in large part to old friend and Belichick's caddy, Matt Patricia, as the offensive quality coach. And then 2021, he was the tight ends coach. And 21 rose to become the passing game coordinator. And then 22 to present, he's been the offensive coordinator.
And yes, 2012 was the Joe Philbin year in Miami. So
Interesting.
I like the diversity of experience there too. I
I do too.
especially like the experience as a tight ends coach, because then as a tight ends coach, obviously you're working both in the passing offense and the running game. So you have I mean, you have much
You
more
have
of a complete
diversity of thought
appreciation.
there.
Yeah, yeah. So it doesn't help at all on the defensive side of the ball. But of course, unless there are very few coaches who are those CEO coaches who then have their guys, which was again what Mayo was trying to be, when really he should have just been like, I'm going to be the defensive coach. Here's my here's my veteran offensive coordinator who's going to run the offense. And he did say, well, Alex is my offensive head coach, but that doesn't really fly when you've got a first year coach or first year play caller. So anyway, we're going
Right.
backwards again. So
I think he's got a very interesting resume. He's got kind of diversity of thought on offense. I just sort of wonder what kind of, coordinators he'd bring around. If you bring like a Philbin type or an Adam Gase type, who he's also worked with too, I just wonder how that's going to go. One of the names that has been sort of bandied about with Ben Johnson as a potential offensive coordinator type is somebody who we haven't thought about in 10 years. And 10 years ago, he was crying on ESPN about Deflategate, and that is Mark Brunell.
I knew you were going to bring that up.
Did you?
I just knew it.
I don't care about that stuff, but at the same point, I know there are going to be people in this town who will.
Yeah.
Who will, and like, it's such a dumb thing to think about, but then at the same point, I kind of love the idea of a guy who was in the NFL for 15 years who would be a mentor to Drake May. Like,
yeah. No,
you
yeah.
know?
I mean that's the biggest thing. If you're bringing him in, you're bringing him in for Drake May, and that's,
Yep.
So here's another one. And he's available. Um he was a scapegoat firing, in my opinion. Lou Anarumo. I can never pronounce that name.
Anarumo.
Yeah.
Anarumo.
He was on that 2012 Dolphins staff as well.
Interesting. He would be a
So-
great defensive coordinator here. I loved those Cincinnati defenses. He would be an awesome coordinator here. I don't necessarily know with how bad this Cincinnati year went, because somebody had to get fired from that staff, and they weren't going to do it to Zach Taylor and Dan Pitcher, who was in his first year as OC. They weren't going to do that. He'd be a guy I'd love to have here as a defensive coordinator, for sure. Sign me up.
So I'm looking at this. I'm looking at this list from the 2012 Dolphins of coaches. So
Great.
Joe Philbin, obviously, Lou Anarumo, Dan Campbell was the tight ends coach. Let's see, we've got Ben Johnson was offensive assistant. Darren Rizzi was the special teams coordinator.
Who's taken over in New Orleans, correct? He was the interim in New Orleans, Darren Rizzi. Okay.
Yeah. We've got Mike Sherman, offensive coordinator, Zach Taylor, assistant quarterbacks coach. I mean, there are names on this list that it's just,
the Philbin tree is weird.
It's fun. Yeah. I mean, it's not quite that, what was it? The Redskins, the Washington,
the Gibbs tree.
Staff. Yeah. No,
the 2010 Washington team. It was McVay. It was Mike McDaniel. It was one of, if not both, LaFleur brothers and Robert Saleh.
So this Philbin staff isn't quite that that level, but it's definitely interesting. It's a little rabbit hole, but anyway, again, down another rabbit hole.
I love stuff like this.
Oh my goodness. So, okay, do we seriously talk about other candidates?
Can I give you a weird name that I like that I don't know that the Patriots would do it?
Sure.
That is Baltimore offensive coordinator Todd Monken.
Okay, I like that.
You can see how great Lamar has been this year and last year, and those offenses have been awesome. He did really well at Georgia, leading them to a national championship as the offensive coordinator with future car dealership owner in Athens, Georgia, Stetson Bennett at the helm. Who knows what he could do with somebody who can actually, have the keys and actually be a potentially great quarterback. I just wonder, because he's been around a while. He's worked under a bunch of different organizations and a bunch of different teams. That was just a name when I looked at sort of coordinators around the league that I was like, oh, I forgot that he's the coordinator in Baltimore. And I think he's just kind of an interesting name.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I mean, I don't think that I've come up with any names that haven't kind of been talked about before, so I don't want to be redundant with what other people have been talking about. I think Flores is interesting, but I think that there are complications with that, namely his lawsuit against the league,
and how Miami ended. I was going to bring up, if we were going to talk about Flores, I don't know if you've seen any of the clips on social from the Ryan Fitzpatrick and Andrew Whitworth podcast. Which, by all accounts, the clips seem great. Fitzpatrick was in that Miami team the last Flores year, and ever the Harvard diplomat, Ryan Fitzpatrick was trying to be very diplomatic about how that tenure ended in Miami, but man, you could tell that he wanted to say how much he thought Brian Flores sucked. I think he's a guy, I don't know that he's ever going to be a head coach again, but if he's an awesome defensive coordinator, you can still make a ton of money doing that. It's sort of like it's the Wade Phillips curse of like, you can't head coach your way out of a wet paper bag, but if you're a defensive coordinator and you lead teams to Super Bowls and really great seasons and division wins, that's pretty good.
All right, so I'm not going to waste any serious time on our on Byron Leftwich or Pep Hamilton. I'm just not. Honestly, I thought that those offenses, especially like the Brady offenses, were good in spite of Byron Leftwich. I think that his success was a product of Tom Brady. I do. Like there were
I agree
decisions
with that.
that he made that I were head scratching then, and I would be hard pressed to find anyone who would defend them. Um, and like Pep Hamilton, yeah, that's fine. But like you said, interesting name as a coordinator, but that's about as far as I'm going to go with it. Maybe not even a coordinator. I don't even know coordinator. Maybe some kind of assistant or consulting role or something like that. All
I
right.
think it's
So
interesting. I will say this for Leftwich. Do you recall who the quarterbacks coach was on that Buccaneers team that won the Super Bowl?
I don't.
It is Clyde Christensen, who is a North Carolina guy and has ties to Ben Johnson. So I can see at least a little bit of the thought process there. Christensen, he was a mentor to both Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck and worked with Brady in New England as well. I'm just trying to connect dots here. I don't want to feel like that Charlie Day gif with the thread on the chalkboard trying to connect things, But Galaxy Brain thought maybe they're trying to get some Clyde Christensen guys in, which makes some sense. And he's a Patriot guy too.
So, where do you think in all of this, Elliot Wolf and Lonzo Highsmith, to a lesser extent, where do you think they land in all this?
Well, I think it depends on who they hire. I wonder. I think if they hire another first-time coach like a Ben Johnson or an Aaron Glenn, I think those two guys are safe in their jobs. I think they really are. I just wonder how Mike Vrabel would feel about either one of them. And I can't see a scenario where both of those guys survive with like a veteran coach like a Vrabel. I just kind of don't. Elliot Wolf doesn't have any connections to them. I certainly don't think Alonzo Highsmith has any connection to Vrabel. I think it's very interesting that this has been a holdover kind of from that Belichick front office. I don't know. I've been thinking about this because I knew that this question was going to come up. We talk enough that I can kind of get a sense of sort of which directions you're going to try and sort of push me towards, Chris. And I just kind of wonder if say Vrabel is the hire, if he doesn't necessarily also come with the idea of, if I'm going to do this, I'm bringing at least one or two guys to sort of work with me on the personnel side that I know and that I trust. And one of the names that came into my head for this, and I think would be a guy that I would completely support if they were to be the person to like head up the personnel department, and it's a guy with Vrabel ties and who has Patriots ties, is a guy like a Scott Pioli. I don't know that he'd do it. I don't. You and I have had the conversation about how certainly during the year with Mayo that they just needed like an old head, like a senior football operations guy to sort of do everything and sort of be that like be the old guy who kind of has the door open and has the ask me anything. I've seen a million things. Tell me what you're thinking and I can help work your way through it. And I feel like if it's a Vrabel, Scott Pioli would be the guy.
No, that's fair. And I wonder if, because one thing that that Robert Kraft mentioned specifically when asked about Elliot Wolf was that they had redone the grading system and they had some things like that that's more related to scouting. If there's a director of scouting role or something like that, that maybe it was one of those things that's just like, okay, at this point the negotiation and that kind of thing is over your head. You swung and missed on a couple of big free agents that you went after, and those were documented again recently. You so it could just be another one of those, hey, you know what, you know we there's things we value about what you do, and there could also be, we liked what we saw with this grading system, but we didn't have a chance to fully implement it through a full cycle. um, so I mean, that's kind of where I think I don't think that he's not the GM now. So I think that leaves wiggle room, you know? So if Vrabel comes in and says, I want so and so, or I want Pioli to, and he'll be the general manager, and that's who everybody in personnel reports to, then that's the kind of thing that, yeah, I could
Yeah.
see something like that happening. Now, something else, and this is more off the wall. I know we've seen conflicting reports about this, and I haven't checked, admittedly, to see if this has been updated. But um, what about um, Alex Van Pelt? Given that they run similar systems, similar offense, he just spent time in Vrabel just spent time in Cleveland, where on top of everything else, a lot of
With
people
Kevin Stefanski.
based on reporting, a lot of people were shocked and upset by the fact that Alex Van Pelt was let go in the first place. Is Does Alex Van Pelt become a holdover? Especially seeing as he wasn't necessarily a Mayo guy, as we've kind of surmised.
No, I've thought about this, and I think it's entirely possible, especially with the Cleveland ties that Mike Vrabel now has. And again, as we're talking about this, under that scenario, not
And
globally.
and I think we can say Alex Van Pelt did a pretty good job with Drake May.
He
Now
did a great job with Drake
we
May.
don't know exactly how much of that was just Drake May's talent and ability. It's hard to, you can't really, split that, but I
Right, you
think
don't
he
know.
did a nice job developing a quarterback who a lot of people said was a little raw. Um, and like there were some people who were talking about how this is the kind of pick that gets you fired, um, which I thought was ridiculous anyway. But um, you
Especially
know,
one sort of coming from the previous head coach, by the way.
right. So yeah, I think that it's not all bad when it came to Van Pelt, and the most important thing was developing the quarterback, and he did that. So sorry, I wanted to interject that as well. It's like,
No, and I'm glad that you did. I like Alex Van Pelt. I think he did a heck of a job considering what was going on over there. But I think he's somebody you should look at as a potential holdover. The other person that I had thought of to keep, and I know you're not going to like this. I don't like the taste of the words that are going to come out of my mouth for this. Is maybe somebody think about in one of these roles, not as head coach, but maybe somewhere on the offensive side of the ball, is somebody who worked really closely with Drake May all year, and that's another failed head coach in Ben McAdoo, who had this weird nebulous offensive assistant role, but I think was working with the quarterbacks pretty closely with TC McCartney. It's weird. All reports, I didn't hear anything negative or positive about McAdoo, but I wonder if he's a guy who gets held over too.
It's possible, but I'll be quite honest. Until you just said his name, I had not thought about him. Um, probably in weeks. So
I think I saw something today. It might have been, maybe it was a Doug Hyde or a Jeff Howe piece about him of like, what was he doing all season? And I remembered, I was like, oh yeah, he was kind of like the young quarterback whisperer. Like he worked a lot with Joe Milton to keep Joe Milton ready to go. And it showed, it worked. Like he looked great on Sunday. But I wonder if that's a guy who, like, the front office at least has maybe some designs for too. Not as a head coach again. I don't want people to think that I'm advocating for weird slick back hair Ben McAdoo to be the coach of this team, because I am not.
all right. Well, we did have some other things on our agenda for tonight. We've already gone an hour and a half, so we might just have to put a pin in those. Um, I know. I'm sure that you had a prime draft, all lined up. Um,
I'm going to send it to you the moment we hang up, because I did a weird one where I was wheeling and dealing, and it's very much a like, Chris Mazza, I've done a weird thing. I kind of don't hate it.
you know what? Okay.
I'll send it to you after.
No. I want to hear this now. I want to hear this now.
Do you?
You've convinced me. Yeah. I won't
All
do
right.
mine because mine's going to be totally boring compared to yours. So we'll just do. We'll just.
All right, perfect.
But yeah, we'll end on this high note. So everybody, if you're listening, get out your pen and paper, because I get the feeling you're going to have to follow along here.
Oh, see, I was going to quote Terrell Owens and say, get your popcorn ready, because the excitement is here. Okay. Me, Greg Cameron, as in Elliott Wolf's position, I have traded the 4th pick to the New Orleans Saints for pick 9 in this year's draft and pick 40 in this year's draft. The Saints ended up taking Abdul Carter, defensive end from Penn State. And then I ended up taking offensive tackle Kelvin Banks Jr. out of Texas. I think he's OL1 in this draft, and the Patriots would be stupid if they don't take him.
For sure.
And then as part of that deal, I got pick 40. I then traded that to the Buffalo Bills with next year's 6th round pick. They took Landon Jackson, the Bills. And then I ended up receiving pick 61 and 62 in this year's draft. I traded 61, but at 62, I did make a selection. I traded 61 to the Jets, who they used that on Arante Arisi, the offensive tackle from the University of Minnesota. I also gave them a 2026 5th for their 2026 2nd and pick 95. So those are the trades that I've made. So now going into this, at 9th overall, I took Kelvin Banks, offensive tackle out of Texas. At 37, I took Shamar Stewart, edge out of Texas A&M. At 62, I took TJ Sanders, a defensive tackle out of South Carolina. Very brief aside, so brief that I don't even know why I'm going to do it. I loved that South Carolina team this year. They were fun. They were tough. Shane Beamer's a madman. Ugh, go Gamecocks. They're great. Then at 68, I took Jalen Royals, wide receiver out of Utah State.
See,
he's
an interesting one to me.
He is too. Especially playing with inconsistent quarterbacks, but seemingly playing well. All right, if this offense stinks next year, despite May, I wonder a guy who's played in kind of crummy offenses. At 79th, I took Dalen Everett, cornerback out of Georgia. At 95, I took one of Chris Mazza's favorite players in this draft. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this, and that's Arande Gadsden, the second wide receiver / tight end from Syracuse. That
I saw
Syracuse team
him.
this year was fun and plucky. Yeah.
I saw him catch just an insane touchdown against BC, and yeah, the kid has the physical tools. Is whether or not he can put it all together and refine his game. I think he's. I don't think he's going to be an all pro at any point, but he's a guy who can big, physical, but athletic, physically athletic specimen. That is just the kind of thing that makes your mouth water. You can think of the things that you can do with moving him around the formation and such. So,
can you say that about any Patriots pass catcher today?
No.
Exactly. At 106, I took Charles Grant, an offensive tackle out of William and Mary. I like taking some fun FCS guys. He's kind of an undersized tackle. Who knows? Draft picks are magic beans. Who knows what you can get? At 142, I took Lathan Ransom, safety out of Ohio State. At 216, I took Donovan Edwards, running back from Michigan. You kind of need a running back, I think, at this point. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Antonio Gibson is still under contract for next year.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think that it's like a 3-year deal, but it's really a 2-year deal. So next year's year 2, something like that.
Yeah, he's got the NFL's version of that Lucas Giolito contract. Yeah, it's weird. At 219, I took Xavier Nwankpa, a safety out of Iowa. Can never go wrong with Iowa safeties. They tend to play pretty well. Iowa safeties are like Iowa tight ends. You don't have to worry about them. They're well coached. They come to the league ready to go. Kirk Ferentz, despite being offensively challenged, has really good tight ends and safeties and defensive players. And then at 240, I took quarterback from Arizona, Noah Fafita.
All right.
Kind of a fun one.
You got crazy with the trades, and I certainly appreciate that. This is it's funny because we did the mock drafts last year where one of us stayed put at 3 and the other one traded down. And I'm interested to see. I think that
I think I traded out in that exercise, by the way. I think I did.
You did. Yes, you did.
Yes, I did.
I think they're gonna stand pat if they have the opportunity. Like they're not going to risk somebody jumping in front of them to take the tackle. But the funny thing is, in my mock draft that I did, I'll just do it. I don't have I don't have the complete like trade breakdown the way that you did.
That's fine.
But I didn't actually take Kelvin Banks. I went a little bit different here. I did stick at 4. But I took Abdul Carter,
who I love. He's an absolute monster.
And in this exercise, Will Campbell fell. I'm guessing arm length had something to do with this. If he fell like this, he was still there at 22. So I traded up to 22 and got Will Campbell.
Our Bayou Prince on the line.
Then have you heard his interviews? Like
yes.
Guy, he's one of these guys who just like gets it too. He's a locker room guy. He's a so when you're making those references to culture, he's the kind of guy that I think if it's the right culture, he's going to buy in. 68, I took Jalen Royals, Utah State. 106, I took Gunnar Helm, the tight end from Texas,
who I also really like.
147, also agreeing that we need there needs to be another running back in the room. I went with 147, Dylan Sampson, the running back from Tennessee,
who was awesome all year for the Vols.
Then I traded up to 178 because Pat Bryant, a wide receiver from Illinois, big, big catch radius kind of guy, outside guy that they don't have right now. I took him at 178. 219. I took my guy, Thor Griffith, defensive tackle out of Louisville. His name is Thor. He graduated from Harvard and then did his grad year at Louisville. So you got a guy named Thor who went to Harvard. So hey,
A man
and
after
then,
my own heart, in a former resident of my own neighborhood.
all right, and then at 240, I took Jack Kelly, linebacker from BYU.
Great.
So yeah, so that's just a now granted, all of this is just for a little bit of fun because a lot of this is going to depend on who the who the head coach is, who the coordinator is, and what kind of offense they're going to want to run. So, it's a little bit silly, and also what happens in free agency. So it's a little bit silly to do this early, but everybody else is, so why not us?
Exactly. If everybody else can have fun, why won't we have fun? I appreciate that you took sort of the more conservative route throughout the draft. I was just like, you know what? No, I'm gonna take as many weird trades as I can, accumulate as many picks as I can, fill as many holes on this team as I can, because who knows what they're gonna do in free agency. That's a conversation for a different day, but
Indeed.
I don't know. I just don't know.
Again, the first domino has to fall here now. And of course, we're live now on Wednesday. We've got a couple of interviews happening on Thursday. Gun to your head, does Vrabel walk out of Foxborough with the contract Thursday night?
I don't know that they're going to let him leave the facility. Yeah. I don't. I don't. I think he's the guy.
I think that if what they think is reaffirmed in the meeting, then he doesn't leave.
Yeah, and that's not to say that Ben Johnson's a bad coach or Aaron Glenn's a bad coach. I just think what the Crafts want in that role is somebody like a Mike Vrabel who can provide that cultural boost and be that guy. So I think they're going to hire Vrabel. If they don't, I would not be shocked if it's Aaron Glenn. It wouldn't.
All right, and with that, we're going to leave you for the evening. Thank you, Greg, for joining me, and we'll see what happens. I mean, of course, anybody who's who's not listening to this live is going to hear it on Friday, so they could be hardcore judging us by Friday based on what happens on Thursday.
I'm willing to let people roast us. If we are wrong in our predictions and in our thoughts on this, please roast us.
All right, folks. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Greg.
Take it easy.
Awesome.
All right, cool.